Be a real day of reckoning, thankfully, for child killer Axel Rudakabana. He's going to be sentenced later on today.
Well, Alistair Silver-Aguirre, B.B. King and Elsie Dot Stankham were murdered in the vicious knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in July of last year.
Well, on Monday, 18-year-old Rudakabana pled guilty to the murders, as well as to producing a biological toxin and being in possession of a PDF file called the Al-Qaeda Training Manual.
Well, GB News Home Security editor Mark White looks at how the killer was left unchecked to carry out his terrible crimes and how the nationwide riots that followed caused a political crisis.
In the aftermath of the horrific events in Southport, anger and disorder struck many communities. Amid a perception authorities were not disclosing key facts about teenage killer Axel Rudakabana, a young man with a violent and deeply disturbing mindset that saw him refer to the Prevent Counter-Extremism programme 3 times, as well as multiple other agencies. We now know, as confirmed by the Prime Minister this week, that information was withheld. Sir Keir Starmer said it was done to ensure any forthcoming trial would not be prejudiced.
The importance of the rule about not disclosing this information is to ensure that the trial can take place and that where an individual is guilty, they're held to account.
But with little official information in the aftermath of the stabbings, the void was filled with online speculation and rumour, which only compounded the sense of outrage and anger. Axel Rudakabana was first referred to the Prevent programme back in 2019 when he was just 13 years of age, after he took a knife to his former school in Formby. It was one of 10 occasions he admitted carrying a knife at school. After being excluded, he returned and assaulted pupils with a hockey stick. He was open in discussing his desire to carry out a school massacre. Yet it seems because there was no apparent evidence that his views were aligned to any particular terrorist group or ideology, counter-extremism practitioners decided not to intervene. Police, the courts, youth justice, social services and other safeguarding agencies also failed to respond in any meaningful way as Rudakabana's downward spiral towards serious violence intensified. And other questions still remain unanswered. A week before the Southport attacks, the teenager's father pleaded with a local taxi driver not to drive him to his former high school, where it's thought he was planning to carry out an attack there. Despite the deadly toxin ricin and Al-Qaeda jihadist documents being discovered at his home just days after the attack, it took a further 3 months before a terror charge and a biological weapons charge were added to the indictment and the public informed. In the months ahead, a public inquiry may provide some answers. Today, the focus is on the length of time in prison the trial judge will decide is the most appropriate response to the most evil and horrific of crimes. Mark White, GB News, Merseyside.
Well, we're joined now by former London police officer and director of Law and Order Foundation, Norman Brennan. Good to see you this morning, Norman. And it's just harrowing, isn't it, listening to it all laid out like that, the number of red flags that were missed, the number of opportunities to stop this violent man and that horrific attack that happened last July.
Absolutely, Ellie. Good morning to you both. You're right. How often have we heard, and I've been in policing and law and order for 46 years, lessons must be learned. I think one of the biggest problems in Britain at the moment is that people are too frightened to intervene. Sometimes because of the ethnicity of the actual person that they are concerned about. They think that if they put that particular person forward, they'll be accused of some sort of racism. Well, if that's the case, it means that individuals, some as this young man, are potentially walking time bombs. And we can't have walking time bombs going around. We've got 160,000 children and young adults last year that were carrying knives. each and every single one potentially could lose their life or take somebody else's. Nobody ever knows when or if you're going to get involved in an altercation. But in this particular young man's case, how is it that a 17-year-old child, and this goes back to when he was 13, had carried a knife 10 times? No one intervened. No one highlighted it.
Well, it was highlighted by the school. I mean, his name was raised, wasn't it? I mean, that seems to be the issue, that his name was raised, but the appropriate authorities decided themselves not to take action.
Absolutely. I think the point I'm getting at, Steve, here is that how can somebody aged 13 have so much anger, so much hatred, and these young children that are self-radicalising? Now, when the public say we're concerned about terrorism, well, of course we're all concerned about terrorism. But these are children. Many years ago, most of us thought that terrorists were adults, that were gangs of adults that were potentially out there to kill and maim people. But we've got children now sitting in their bedrooms, self-radicalising. Now, this individual is one of the most dangerous people in Britain, and it's not a hardened criminal. It's a child. What does that say about society? And he's not alone. I just gave you an example there of 160,000 children that are carrying knives on the streets every day of the week. Every one of those a potential killer. I report on homicide and gun and knife crime on a daily basis. I've never reported so many children getting involved in crime. My breaking news this morning, 5 children have been arrested in relation to conspiracy to murder a girl that was left on a roadside, horrifically injured. If you want me to give my personal view on knife crime in Britain, we're on life support. Now, I've been dealing with knife crime as a police officer for 31 years. I nearly died myself when I was stabbed by an armed burglar. I've helped pick up the devastation of others. We don't take it seriously. If you carry a gun in a public place, it's a mandatory sentence of a minimum of 5 years. You're 3 times more likely to be stabbed to death than shot to death. Yet often when you carry a knife, you get a punishment no more serious than a parking ticket. Something has seriously gone wrong. And when Yvette Cooper says that we need to crack down on Amazon, yes, we need to crack down on everyone. She's actually distorted the true facts. Out of Britain, there's 28.4 million houses in Britain. That means 150 to 200 million knives on the streets of Britain or in houses. And most people are stabbed or murdered by a house knife, not by a zombie knife.
Well, as you say, that the threat of terrorism is changing. Keir Starmer said that this week, didn't he? He said that it's now we're seeing perpetrators that are loners, that are misfits. And as you say, they're being radicalised in their bedrooms. But with this changing threat that we're hearing so much about, you look at Prevent, which is meant to prevent these sorts of terror attacks. Well, it's not fit for purpose, surely, because Axel Rudikabana was referred 3 times and deemed no threat. And we've heard it before, haven't we, with London Bridge attack? We've heard it with the Reading attack as well. All of these perpetrators are known to prevent, and that the attack is not prevented.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Prevent is a voluntary thing. It's in relation to schools, colleges, and even parents. Now, if you know someone or believe someone is self-radicalising or showing very worrying traits along that line, it's your duty as a public servant, and in these particular cases, officials that oversee schools and colleges, to highlight it. I think we're living in a society where everybody else says that's somebody else's problem, it's not mine. Well, the people that ignored this one or didn't deal with it appropriately, that's somebody else's problem, resulted in 3 young girls being stabbed to death and 10 others almost losing their lives. If this is not a wake-up call, I don't know what it is. Maggie Oliver has just highlighted, and rightly so, an ex-colleague of mine, about the grooming gangs. I believe that knife crime in Britain and radicalisation and those as age as young as 13 or 14 pose some of the most serious risks that 20 or 30 years ago we only thought that came from grown adults.
That's a fair point. Norman, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. I mean, clearly. So there's knife amnesties and things that happen every few years and what have you, but they're not getting to the root of the problem. with all of this. And then every day, almost, it seems, or certainly every week, we're getting these horrific stories, like Leo Ross, the 12-year-old, on a lot of front of the papers, stabbed to death on his way home from school. A 12-year-old. A 14-year-old has been arrested in that. I mean, this is where it becomes really concerning. But what can be done and what needs to be done?
Yeah, it's just tragic, isn't it? Absolutely awful.